Hello, and welcome to the Things That Bother Me. Today's topic: the spoiled, out of touch American baby boomers. Every empire has a generation that cashes out the future. In America, that generation is the baby boomers. They were handed the keys to a nation rebuilt by the sacrifice of their parents' silent generation stoicism, greatest generation blood, sweat, and tears. They grew up in the golden age of cheap housing, free college, thriving unions, and endless upward mobility. And what did they do with it? They took everything and gave nothing back. They drained the well, then mocked the rest of us for being thirsty. The spoiled legacy. American boomers were the first true consumer generation. They came of age with rock and roll, color TV, muscle cars, and the suburban dream, all funded by an economy with unparalleled growth. But instead of safeguarding those opportunities, they hoarded them. They voted to dismantle unions while enjoying pensions themselves. They bought houses for $20,000 and now expect millennials and Gen Z to pay $300,000 for the same roof. They got free or nearly free college, then presided over a system that buried future generations in debt. They built a low-tax, high-debt society that shifted costs onto the young while cutting every safety net. They like to say they worked hard. But the truth is, they worked during the only era when hard work still guaranteed stability. They mistake luck for virtue and treat the generations that followed as failures instead of victims of their policies. Family betrayal, boomers at home. Perhaps the harshest indictment of American boomers is not just what they did to the nation, but what they did to their own families. The hoarding mentality. Many boomers refuse to help their children or grandchildren financially, even while sitting on wealth built by cheap homes, strong pensions, and decades of prosperity. They tell their kids to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, ignoring the fact that the boots themselves now cost a fortune. Inheritance over support. Instead of helping with student debt, rent, or medical bills, American boomers often cling to their assets until death, treating inheritance as a delayed gift. By then, their children are already middle-aged, having spent decades struggling. The "I will spend it all" attitude. A growing number of American boomers boast about spending every dollar before they die, ensuring their kids and grandkids get nothing. They frame it as enjoying life, but it's really another form of generational selfishness, living large now while knowingly leaving their family with crushing debt, soaring rent, and no safety net. In other cultures, leaving something for the next generation is seen as an honor. In America, boomers turned it into a punchline. Guilt and gaslighting. When younger generations ask for help, they're scolded as entitled or lazy. The irony? These same boomers were bankrolled by silent generation parents who helped with down payments, babysitting, and education. Boomers and the laws of convenience. Perhaps nothing reveals the hypocrisy of the boomer generation more than how they shaped laws to suit their stage of life and then reversed them once they were done. Drinking age double standard. In the 1970s, many states lowered the drinking age to 18. Why? Because boomers were that age and wanted the right to drink legally. But by the late 1980s, once boomers had passed 21 and started worrying about their kids, they pushed for the national drinking age to be raised back up. They enjoyed the freedom, then slammed the door shut. Abortion rights. Roe v. Wade, 1973, gave boomer women the right to abortion at the height of their reproductive years. But decades later, as they aged into positions of power, it was their judges, their lawmakers, their generation's cultural warriors who dismantled it. Boomers were the first generation to gain reproductive rights and the last to ensure future generations would lose them. The war on drugs. Young boomers experimented freely in the 1960s and 70s with weed, LSD, and more. Once older, many of them voted for harsh drug laws in the 80s and 90s that criminalized the very behaviors they once embraced, filling prisons with Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z. The debt machine. Boomers attended college when tuition was almost free. But by the time their kids came of age, they voted for policies that gutted public funding for education, creating the trillion-dollar student loan crisis. They enjoyed affordable degrees, then turned education into a lifelong debt trap for everyone after them. Boomers never believed in fair rules. They believed in temporary rules, whatever benefited them in the moment. Once they got what they wanted, they changed the law to lock the next generation out. The inheritance of ruin. Today, America's youth inherit a poison chalice. Wages that haven't budged in 40 years. Housing out of reach. Healthcare tied to jobs that barely exist. A shredded safety net. A democracy corroded by money and apathy. And when younger generations cry out, boomers respond with sneers, "Stop whining. Just work harder. We had it tough too." No, they didn't. They had it lucky, and they pulled the ladder up behind them. Boomers in the workplace. If the American dream was tilted in boomers' favor at home, it was just as stacked in the workplace. The best shifts, the cushiest jobs. When boomers entered the workforce in the 1960s and 70s, they had access to union-protected jobs, pensions, and rising wages. They snapped up the best shifts, the most stable roles, and quickly climbed into management, not because they were exceptional, but because the economy was expanding and they happened to be the ones coming of age at the right time. Managerial gatekeepers. By the 1980s and 1990s, boomers had moved into management positions and began pulling up the ladder. They enjoyed job security in their youth, but when Gen X, Millennials, and now Gen Z entered the workforce, boomers treated them as disposable. Instead of mentorship, they offered hostility, low wages, no benefits, unstable schedules, and pay your dues speeches that no longer matched the economy. Exploiting younger workers. Boomers perfected the art of exploiting younger generations on the job. They cut full-time positions into part-time, stripped benefits, and demanded flexibility, all while locking themselves into seniority pay and guaranteed retirement packages. They made sure the system worked for them, even if it meant gutting it for everyone else. The culture of disrespect. Younger workers weren't just underpaid, they were dismissed. Boomers coined the lazy millennial stereotype, mocked Gen Z's demands for living wages, and scolded Gen X for not working hard enough. But the reality is, boomers had it easier, and they chose to make it harder for the generations after them. The double standard. Boomers were the last generation to enjoy the promise that hard work pays off. They got stable careers and lifelong benefits. Then, once in power, they broke that promise, outsourcing jobs, pushing gig work, and blaming the young for not thriving in the wreckage. Boomers in the workplace didn't just benefit from a booming economy, they reshaped labor into a pyramid where they sat comfortably at the top, while everyone else was forced to scramble at the bottom. How boomers abroad differ. Not all boomers are created equal. In fact, American boomers are uniquely entitled and destructive compared to their peers around the world. In much of the world, boomers, even with less wealth, show a stronger sense of family responsibility. Europe, in countries like Italy, Spain, and Greece, it's common for parents and grandparents to provide housing, childcare, or financial support well into adulthood. Multi-generational households remain strong, not stigmatized. Asia, in Japan, Korea, and China, filial piety and collective family survival mean boomers actively pass down resources, not just possessions. Sacrificing for children is cultural, not optional. Canada and Scandinavia, stronger safety nets make intergenerational support easier, but many boomers still see helping their kids buy a first home or cover education as natural, not burdensome. Post-war context. Europe, Japan, and much of the world had to rebuild after World War II. Their boomer generations grew up with rationing, austerity, and collective sacrifice. American boomers grew up in prosperity, shielded from destruction, with factories booming and wealth flooding in. They had advantages other nations could only dream of. Family and support. Europe and Asia, boomers often support children and grandchildren with housing, education, or childcare. Multi-generational households are normal, and sacrifice for family is expected. America, boomers hoard wealth, preach independence, and in many cases brag about spending everything before they die. They inherited help from the silent generation but refuse to give it forward. Workplace behavior. Europe and Canada, boomers inherited strong labor protections and, for the most part, maintained them. Many passed on benefits like healthcare and retirement security. America, boomers grabbed the best jobs, seniority pay, and pensions for themselves, then dismantled unions and full-time security once they moved into management. They treated Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z as disposable, cutting hours, wages, and stability. Instead of mentoring, they mocked and exploited. Laws of convenience. Europe and Japan, while not perfect, many boomers abroad kept social compacts intact: universal healthcare, subsidized education, and consistent family protections. America, boomers bent laws to serve their moment in life, then reversed them. Drinking age lowered when they were teens, raised again once they were parents. Abortion rights gained when they were young, dismantled once older. Drug experimentation tolerated in the 60s to 70s, then outlawed harshly when others tried. College nearly free for them, turned into lifelong debt for their kids. By contrast, American boomers see independence as a moral test. They believe kids should make it on their own while forgetting the head start they themselves received. The result is fractured families, where children struggle alone and grandchildren grow up in instability, all while grandparents sit comfortably on assets they either hoard or blow on themselves. The core difference. Boomers elsewhere lived within constraints, often carrying scars of war and recession. American boomers, by contrast, lived in excess, then slammed the door shut for everyone after them. They were the first to enjoy the American dream in full bloom, and they made sure it would die with them. History's verdict: the American boomer legacy. When the history books are written, the story of the American boomers won't be one of triumph, but of squandered opportunity. The inheritance they squandered. They were born into the wealthiest, most powerful nation in human history, untouched by the destruction of World War II, with unmatched industrial dominance, endless land, and a growing middle class. Instead of stewarding that inheritance, they consumed it like locusts. Cheap houses, free education, thriving unions, affordable healthcare, all devoured, leaving nothing but scraps for their children. The generational hypocrisy. Historians will note how boomers demanded rights and freedoms in their youth: civil rights, women's rights, reproductive rights, the right to party, protest, and experiment. Yet in power, they stripped away those same rights from the generations behind them, replacing liberty with restrictions, debt, and surveillance. The culture of greed. Future generations will not see boomers as the flower children of Woodstock or the idealists of the 1960s. They will see the yuppies of the 1980s, the corporate raiders, the deregulators, the mortgage speculators, and the smug retirees bragging about how cheap their first house was. Their true cultural mark will be remembered as greed masked as freedom. The legacy they leave. Boomers will be remembered as the first American generation to leave things worse than they found them. The climate crisis they ignored. The economy they hollowed out. The safety nets they shredded. The democracy they poisoned with money and apathy. Their legacy isn't growth, but collapse. Not prosperity, but precarity. History will not look at, what did boomers build? It will teach, what they destroyed. In closing, the baby boomers will be remembered as the first American generation to leave their children worse off. They inherited the richest nation on earth and transformed it into the richest third world country. They built their comfort on borrowed time, borrowed money, and borrowed dreams, and the debt collectors have arrived. History will not see them as the greatest generation. History will see them as the greediest. The ones who lived large, died fat, and left the rest of us to choke on the ashes. And for that, we will never forgive them. Thank you for watching my video. Please like, comment, and subscribe below. Until next time.